Hey everybody, welcome to the Poor Sports Seattle podcast. And as you can see, I'm joined by Bryce Coutts of the Hawks Eye podcast, formerly Hawk Zone Rundown podcast, former guest of the podcast, friend of the podcast, and if I could say podcast 75 or 80 more times in the next 10 minutes, we'll be in good shape. We have a lot to talk about. There's a lot of Seahawks news. Obviously, they dominated the Washington Commanders yesterday. The trade deadline is tomorrow as we record this. Hopefully also tomorrow as I edit and release this. If not, it's today. But first off, how are you feeling about the Seahawks, Bryce?
I am over the moon about this Seahawks team. For me, I had a special feeling that these guys were going to do something unique this year. When I was at training camp, the vibe around this team was just different. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. Oh, that was weird. But yeah, no, I felt this team was different in training camp. I felt Mike Macdonald's message finally was sinking in with this group a little bit, and you could see the buy-in. Like offseason, they actually did have their entire team there at some point or another. In my predictions, I have them going 13-4. I had them starting 5-2. I didn't have them losing to the 49ers, obviously, week one. I think that one was kind of a bummer for everybody. But I did have them at 5-2 going into their bye, and then coming out, I had them beating, potentially the Commanders. It's this team, there's just something different about it. And it's different than even when Pete had the LOB, like just the demeanor of this team. There's similarities like the brotherhood thing, but the depth on this team and how well they're all playing. And Sam Darnold is just a topic in his own right, and so is Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like, I don't think we can really think of a quarterback duo like what JSN and Darnold are doing this year that we've really ever had in Seattle to the extent and the effectiveness that it's had this year.
It's interesting you make the comparison to the LOB because, that's like the obvious. I think that the greatest era of Seahawks football is headlined by the LOB as much as I may have defended Russell Wilson in the past. But those teams were characterized, I think, by like just adequate pass rushes, for example. Not a lot of blitzing and just adequate pass rushes. Pass rushes that put enough pressure to make a quarterback make a decision that the LOB could capitalize on, right? And now I think with the kind of chaos that Mike Macdonald's creating, it's actually, while there aren't guys that are, I don't think there's going to be someone who puts up 15, 20 sacks that's on the roster right now, but the pass rush, you feel it constantly.
Yeah, you do. And what you're seeing is Mike Macdonald really get into his bag now with the pressures. And this is something he couldn't really do last year, right? Like we all know last year, the first half of that season, the defense was kind of a bit of a jumbled mess. Week 8 comes around, that bye. They get rid of Dotson and Baker. They bring in Knight off the bench, basically, and then trade for Ernest Jones. And all of a sudden, that defense started to play better. But Mike had alluded to, we had to go back to basics on that bye week. Like, we had to go back and kind of relearn everything. Kobe Bryant stepped in as the starting safety at that point. And the team started to pick up and go from there. But they were still missing pieces, right? They didn't really truly have, like, yes, they had Devin Witherspoon as a nickel, but they didn't have an X factor. They didn't have a DeMarcus Lawrence off the edge or a Chenna at that point to really be an effective edge player. Or Derek Hall hadn't kind of gone into the role he's gotten to now. So now what you're seeing is they have, I think, 12 of the potential 15 starters that played at points last year back, going into the offseason, going through the playoffs. So they were able to start at a different point in Mike Macdonald's scheme. And now what you're really seeing is after that Tampa Bay game where I think Mike truly is embarrassed by that performance, and not by necessarily the team, but by him as a coach and a play caller and defensive mind, has really allowed him. And he said it today on his show on 710. He said, one of the things I got to keep reminding myself is, Mike, get out of the way. Like, get out of the way of these players. Let these players play. Put them in positions to play fast and be successful. And now you're starting to see it. Like, some of the blitzes and sub, blitzes that he's bringing are absolutely, the one that caused Jaden Daniels to throw the interception last night to Ty Okada, which Ty Okada made a phenomenal play on the sideline. But you watch, like, Ernest Jones is lined up there like he's coming on a blitz, and they've got it all overloaded to the left side of Washington's line. And all of a sudden, you see Devin just come flying in untouched because the running back has to take the initial pressure inside and can't pick up Devin. And Devin's right in Jaden Daniels' face. Those are things we didn't see a lot of last year, and now you're starting to see Mike really dial into his pressure packages that we saw a lot with the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, and I was watching, I'm no like defensive analyst, so I'm not an offensive analyst. I'm not you have a coaching background. I have a playing Madden background from an X's and O's perspective. But my mom, who's also, you believe it or not a football analyst, was watching, and I was trying to show her like the kind of how the front seven does a lot of interesting stuff that creates pressure without blitzing, right? Like, so having guys that are kind of hovering around the line and then they drop into coverage, and guys that rush out of positions where you wouldn't expect them to. And so it really reminds me, again, not in concept, but in the way that Pete Carroll kind of changed the way defense was being played at the time. It feels like the Seahawks are finally back on the leading edge of defensive philosophy and scheme.
I 100% agree with that. And I think, the comparisons that we heard when Mike got hired last year of, well, this guy's like the McVay of defense. Like he's just on the forefront constantly of different things. That's the one thing I think that's a little bit different than Mike and Pete, in the sense that Pete had a philosophy, and you're seeing it now with Vegas. Like, Pete hasn't changed his stripes. They're still running a lot of the same basic things they ran in Seattle, because that's what Pete knows and that's what Pete's comfortable with. And for, the biggest thing I'll say is, when you go back and look at the history of the NFL, and you look at when Pete started coaching, offenses didn't have as many drastic changes. Their schemes relatively kind of fit the same, so you could kind of build defenses that would last for a long time and principally would be able to hold up. Mike Macdonald's era with the Kyle Shanahans and the McVays and the Kevin O'Connells and all these offensive minds, and the Andy Reids even, they changed their stripes so often. Like, there's still core basic principles to their offenses, but the way they do things, like McVay went from being zone to now gap power with zone. And Kevin O'Connell does a little bit of this. And so Mike has to constantly adapt his defense. Like, yeah, I've got my principle, but like Mike's principle is, I like to simulate pressure. Okay, but I can do that out of a bunch of different things. And that's what makes Mike's defense so interesting to me, is it looks basic in what they do, but at the same time, for an offense and for an offensive coordinator and quarterbacks, it is so complex at the same time, because you're not sure where that pressure's coming, so you don't really get a good pre-snap identification of what they're doing.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch, because it also helps them. And tell me if this is right. Tell me if I'm perceiving this correctly. It doesn't help them stop a guy like Jaden Daniels because it's like perfect at containing him, but it's sometimes Jaden Daniels is gonna beat every team. A guy with his ability is gonna beat every team. But when you do this stuff that's deceptive, it means that sometimes you're going to win when you wouldn't win. Like, sometimes you're going to win the play. Sometimes you're going to have a person where he rolls out to, or where he tries to escape pressure, already there because he had no idea the pressure was coming from that spot. And it creates these big plays where, yes, he rushes a throw or he ends up getting sacked or I mean, and obviously this isn't the preferred outcome, but like even he had somebody there when he was trying to get into the end zone at the end of the game that it ends up being the play that injures him, and he shouldn't have been in that game, absolutely. But yeah, they played him in a way that I don't think I've seen many teams play him in his brief career. And some of that might be, maybe he's a little rusty, a little slow, a step slow coming off an injury, but I don't think so.
What was interesting last night is Seattle didn't really spy Jaden Daniels. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of teams have done, is they've taken a player and committed him to, hey, your responsibility in this is to, if he leaves, you're chasing. Mm-hmm. And that was something I found interesting that Mike didn't do last night. Mike really banked on, I'm going to bring different pressures. We're going to rush with 4. We're going to use, if he breaks contain, we rally. That's what we do. But the thing that it caused for Jaden Daniels was, because of what Mike does behind that pressure, with the moving of his coverages and all that, he can't get a solid read on what he's looking at based versus his concept. So now Jaden Daniels is hanging onto the ball that split second longer, and that's allowing that pressure to really start. Like, he was pressured, I think it was 51 or 50% of his dropbacks last night, which is over half, which is the most he's been pressured in his NFL career. And that's without a spy being attached to him. That's with them saying, okay, cool, you get out. We'll give you that occasional run because we'll rally up, and we have the athletes in the secondary and in our linebacking core to make sure that's not a massive explosive. But at the same time, we're going to make it really hard for you to get the ball downfield. And I know they were missing Terry McLaurin and they were missing some of their weapons, but that's still like you are now taking that away from a young quarterback who's like looking at that defense going, hey, when they spy, I know where these windows are roughly going to be based on this guy being committed to me. Now that I don't, that guy's moving around. Now I'm holding on to that ball that extra second longer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's I thought that was very, very interesting. And especially, by the way, and I haven't heard as much about this year, and maybe it's just because he's been injured and hasn't been as successful, but this is the guy who was the poster boy for VR and this sped up processing power because of the limited reps quarterbacks are able to take, and you know, you're confusing that guy because oh, you know what? I just got a text from my wife. Someone hit my car.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Can we pause this and I go out there and check it out?
Yep.
All right. I'll be back up in just a minute. All right.
Yeah. No worries.
Bye. Back.
Everything okay?
I'm back with I've got an apparent hit and run on my car, which is nice.
Oh, geez.
It was, I have a suspicion that it was a delivery driver, so we're going to go through, we have like a front door camera and go through the footage of that. But yeah, anyways, so we were talking about Jaden Daniels, the Seahawks, causing a bunch of pressure, and that's fine. I think the biggest storyline from yesterday, more than obviously the injury to Jaden Daniels is going to be the biggest, I think, national story, but the very close behind it is Sam Darnold, like, continuing to announce himself as an MVP candidate after being very good last year for all but 2 games and people really overblowing those 2 games. I know that you're a guy who, even before the season, was saying you thought the Seahawks would end up extending Sam Darnold beyond this deal. And I'll be honest with you, I thought you were completely wrong at the time. I think you're a smart guy. I just didn't think you were right on that, right? Now it's hard to imagine. Right now, it's hard to imagine another scenario, right? So tell me what you saw in Sam Darnold back then and how he's either met or exceeded those expectations you had.
So the thing I saw with Sam when I watched him in training camp and why I thought, and, the preseason and so on, is you were seeing a quarterback from when he was even in Carolina, at the back end of the Carolina, the year in San Francisco, coming to the Minnesota, you were seeing a guy that had finally figured it out and figured out how to play this position and was getting developed by Jordan Palmer, who's developed some other really good quarterbacks, Josh Allen being one. You saw a guy that was humble enough to go and sit behind a 7th-round pick in Brock Purdy. So to me, the biggest thing when I looked at Sam was you have a guy that understands his own limitations, but at the same time, his limitations versus where his ceiling are is massively different. Right. And his limitations are, okay, he, may throw the odd bad pick. He did last night. He threw a pick where if you actually watch it from the, again, footage from all 22 behind, he throws that a little bit ahead of Cody White. Cody White's catching that and still running with it. He just put it in a bad spot on that particular moment, and it happens. But for me, the reason why I felt so confident was you were getting a leader. You were getting someone that, you look at that Vikings video when he comes into the locker room after that win and how that team just responds to him. And you look at how this team is responding to him now, like the way these guys talk about Sam, they didn't really talk that way about, Geno Smith. That never was the conversation. And, you never really heard a lot of those guys talk about Russ even in the later years that same way. The way these guys talk about Sam is like he's a guy. He's a guy's guy. He's one of our guys. Like, and you hear Mike McDonald talk about it. You hear all these guys. To me, I think this is Sam Darnold. I don't think it's a sample size. I don't think it's, wait for him to turn into a pumpkin. This is who Sam Darnold is. And what you're seeing is Sam Darnold playing good, efficient football. Like, he threw for 330 yards last night and 4 touchdowns on only 24 pass attempts. It's not like he was out there throwing, when we see numbers like that come up from Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, they're throwing 34 times and 40 times. Like, we're talking about a guy that is just efficient in what he does. And you're seeing a guy that plays within the system and what it asks of him to do, which is be efficient, don't turn the ball over a lot. He's thrown 5 interceptions this year in 9 games, okay? Or 8 games, I guess, if you want to go by that. But he's also thrown double-digit touchdowns already. And he's made JSN and helped JSN turn into probably the top receiver in the NFL this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Seahawks have, by some standards, like the number one passing offense in football. There's, some things that are not the number one, but some of the efficiency stats that I've looked at, they're the most efficient passing offense, and not efficient without volume. They are also passing the ball a decent amount. They have there's a couple scary things about that, and very often on teams, a quarterback's a single point of failure. That's like kind of the nature of the NFL, right? Is you have this one guy who, if he goes down, you're fucked. But they also have a second single point of failure in JSN, it seems, where it's like, I think that some of the fans overestimated the importance of having like skill set diversity in the receiving core, especially going into a Clint Kubiak offense. Having a guy like Cooper Kupp, who's got a similar, albeit aged, skill set of what JSN's doing. Torrey Horton's different, but he's not exactly like a Joe Juravicious type or a DK Metcalf type, right? Like he's the closest thing they have to a guy who can take the top off of the defense, I think, outside of JSN. They're relying a lot on Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I want to know from you. There's a lot of interdependency position-wise. The receivers depend on the quarterback depends on the receivers. If JSN goes down with an injury, he plays very physical. He's catching a high volume of passes. This is not an unlikely event that he goes down. Does that completely derail the Seahawks season, or do they have someone who can step in and maybe handle a higher volume of targets? Is it Cooper Kupp?
It's an interesting question, because I think if they lose JSN for any significant amount of time, they lost him, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. But if that were to happen, I think you'd see a wild card level team. You'd see a team, and when I say wild card, I mean a team that sneaks into the playoffs. They're not in contention for the division. I just think it's going to throw off the offense enough. I think there's pieces like Cooper Kupp, Elijah Royal, they seem to be trying to get more involved. AJ Barner's there. The biggest thing for me where this team, because if they were to lose JSN, they don't have a run game they can turn and lean on and be like, okay, we're going to run the ball really effectively right now, because that's still something they're struggling to do. If they had a more effective run game, I'd say you'd be able to handle it probably a little bit better, and you probably wouldn't necessarily see the level of dependency on JSN. But what you saw last night, which I found rather interesting, you see JSN, he gets his 8 or 9 targets, he's catching 7 of them. For 130 yards, but no touchdowns. Instead, you're seeing guys like Torrey Horton getting open. You're seeing other guys being able, and that's the one thing I'll say about this with Torrey Horton is Torrey Horton, I think by the end of the year, will be theoretically receiver number 2. Mm-hmm. Cooper Kupp will still take the reps as number 2, but really be receiver 3 statistically. But the thing with Cooper Kupp, and this is where I think a lot of people may have gotten their hopes a little too high with what they expected from him. I think a lot of people got wrapped up. It's Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's this. Like, I looked at Cooper Kupp and went, some people out on Twitter and Seahawks Twitter were like, oh, well, let's compare DK Metcalf and Geno Smith's number earlier in the season to Sam Darnold and Cooper Kupp, because that's what we traded for. We're swapped out. And I'm like, no, Cooper Kupp, go look at Tyler Lockett's stats. JSN stats are comparable to DK. There's your swap there. And Geno and Sam, fine. But Cooper was brought in here to be the new Tyler. And what you saw last night was them even pan to Cooper on the sideline, sitting there with a headpiece in, going through the notes, talking to receivers, talking to Torrey Horton and Cody White and Ricky White, and helping out that way. That's what the value of Cooper Kupp is more than anything, is that level of veteran leadership and work ethic and how to be a pro is going to help Seattle in the long run. Like JSN, I don't think JSN is having the season he's having unless Cooper Kupp is on this roster. And some people may look at that and scoff at it and be like, no, JSN was... No. JSN has openly admitted the things he's already learned from Kupp have helped his game immensely that he hadn't learned yet. And so that's where I think that's where you're seeing some of the biggest takeaway. But to your point earlier, Casey, like, yeah, if they lose JSN, this is a very dependent offense right now. They need to find some semblance of balance to survive a potential where that could be.
So I do want to talk to you about the deadline, and this would have been a perfect situation. One thing that I want to ask you about before we talk about the deadline, and I want to talk about how the Seahawks can improve the run game at the deadline, as in addition to other parts of the team. What the hell's going on with Geno Smith? Like, I spent the whole offseason, and I'll tell you, this is my opinion, and it was a qualified, cowardly opinion, but I believed it at the time, and I stand by it to a degree. I said I think that Geno Smith is probably slightly better than Sam Darnold, but the cost savings and so Sam Darnold plus whatever you spend that money on, plus whatever you spend that third round pick on, not even to consider that he's 27 years old and the future is brighter, probably, just for 2025, I thought that combination of assets was going to be more valuable than Geno Smith. If it was just win one game, at the time I thought I wanted Geno Smith, and then it's hard to argue with 8 games of data and Geno Smith looking overwhelmed in Las Vegas, and at points showed yesterday, that game was pretty heavily featured on Red Zone. We got to see a little bit of the Geno that we grew to like in Seattle, and then we saw the exact Geno that we grew to hate in Seattle kind of crop up at the same time. But what's going on that's making him perform so much worse there than he did in Seattle?
I think it's the culture. I think it's the coaching staff. I think it's some of the things that Geno didn't like about Seattle were actually making him good in Seattle. And what I mean by that is, if you read the article that came out and Geno said, Seattle wasn't a fit for me, Vegas is a better fit for me, and just who I am as a person, Geno wanted to have, in my opinion, I think, Geno wanted it to be all about him and how great he was, and some of those aspects, think about it. This is the guy that we're talking about that held out of camp to prove a point about why you need to sign me. I'm injured, but I'm really not. I want you to see that how bad. Like, guys that are leaders of teams don't do that to prove a point.
Sure.
And that's where what I think you're seeing now in Vegas is you're seeing exactly what I saw with Geno, and where it was really interesting as a Seahawks fan with it, because I liked Geno. I thought Geno was a above average, good bridge quarterback in the NFL. That's what I always thought. I never got on the hype wagon where Geno's a top 10 quarterback. And I never went on the other way where Geno was a bottom 10 quarterback. I was stuck in the middle, and there were two extremes a lot of the time in Seattle. Either, to your point, you loved him or you hated him. There was no middle ground, really.
Yeah.
The thing that I think you're seeing right now that's peaking up is exactly my biggest concern with Geno Smith, which was consistency. Geno couldn't consistently play good football unless everything else around him was going like superbly well. And some people might turn around and be like, well, Sam this year is only playing good football. Like, well, no, Sam's also made some amazing moments happen where everything has broken down, where Anthony Bradford has done Anthony Bradford things and whiffed on blocks. And, there's certain things I just see with Sam where I go, yeah, he can consistently play on-time good football within structure. Like, I don't know if Geno's going to be comfortable throwing only 24 times in a game. Geno might like throwing what he did with Grubb, where he was throwing 30 times a game. And you look at, what Vegas has done. They have Ashton Genty, and they are almost refusing to fully lean into having that all-star level of a back. They did a little bit more in this game, and they played better, but that's where I look. And I think part of it, too, Casey's age. I think, everyone was talking about, he doesn't have that wear and tear. 35 is still 35, and his arm is missing some of the zip it had. And, he's playing how I thought Geno would play. And I think this proves again where John Snyder's evaluation of quarterbacks and where their kind of peaks and valleys are really comes true, because he moved off Russell, and Russell became a total dumpster fire, which is sad because, I loved Russell when he was here at points. I still was one of the people that thought they should have moved off Russ earlier than they did. But, and same with Geno. Like, every time he's moved off a quarterback in Seattle, that guy has not had a great career afterwards. So hopefully Sam Darnold just retires a Seahawk and we never have to see Sam Darnold go somewhere else and just turn back into New York Jets Sam Darnold.
Well, do you at least have faith that if John Schneider moves on from him, he's going to implode after he leaves Seattle?
Exactly.
As opposed to, I don't know how many teams are going to keep sending high draft picks to Seattle for quarterbacks, but
I don't think you'll see it much longer.
Okay, so let's talk about that deadline. So the statistics that I care about show the Seahawks having, and you can tell me if you disagree with any of this, pretty bad, even arguably one of the worst run games in the NFL. One of the best passing offenses, and top third pass defense, top third run defense. So the very obvious weakness is the running game. But you and I may disagree on this. But actually, I guess first, those 4 quadrants: run defense, run offense, pass offense. Do you agree with my general assessment that they're good at 3 of those things and bad at 1 of those things?
Oh, absolutely. The run game is not anywhere near where it should be.
So I am from the camp, and you can choose to let me know if you're from a different camp. I don't believe that running backs don't matter as people, but I don't think that the Seahawks can fix this running game by acquiring a different running back. I don't think that the running backs themselves are the problem most often. There might be because they kind of have guys that are both types, and neither one is particularly good week in and week out, right? So my belief is that it probably stems from offensive line play, maybe scheme, but more offensive line play. Do we agree when we get to that point in the conversation?
I'm a bit of a 50-50 on this with the Seahawks running game. And the reason I say that is I did a really interesting video with Corbin Smith where we broke down especially one run in the Texans game with Kenneth Walker, where with this zone scheme, and I think this is where people sometimes don't really understand when they say wide zone versus inside zone versus split zone. There's all these different zone conversations. And inevitably what it means is on a zone run, there are usually sometimes 1 to 2 holes or opportunities in targeting to hit your front side or your backside cutback lane. And so if we talk about Kenneth Walker, he is struggling right now on his track. So what I mean that is when he gets the ball, where he is in relation to the line developing its path. He is struggling to see the backside cut lane a lot of the time. And so me and Corbin did a really good, interesting video. Seattle ran a split zone play, and there is a alley for him to hit backside right off of Sundell's butt and Bradford's. And I've always been a believer of for every, to say this properly, for every ass there is a hole. And so if you run off the ass of a lineman, you will find a hole. Sure. And that was one thing that Ken Walker has struggled with this year. And Zach Charbonnet at the same point, he's much better at that. He is better at finding some of those cutback lanes to hit because he's come from a Chip Kelly system. He's come from Harbaugh's system. He knows it a lot better. What Seattle needs at the running back position is they need a mix of Charbonnet and Ken Walker. They need the guy that's patient enough to, Corbin said it really well, which is feather the break and then accelerate, which is as a running back, when you're in these zones, you're not trying to hit the line full speed until you are 100% sure what you're targeting. And once you decide, you hit it and go. And that's where you get the feather, the brake, and hit the accelerator kind of thing. But the thing for me when I watch Ken Walker is he doesn't see it well enough right now, and I think he's pressing. And then with Zach Charbonnet, they keep trying to toss and run these weird toss plays, and it's that's not Charbonnet's strength. Let him run zone and cut inside and lower his pads. And a few times they did it. It's a bit of both, Casey, because I think Anthony Bradford does not fit this scheme. And in training camp, there were some positives, but the thing with training camp, and this is something I'm going to make sure of, I'm more critical of next year, is I think I got wrapped up a little bit at camp of being, more of a fan than looking at it through a coach's lens at points, especially with Bradford, and especially with this offensive line as a whole, because when you're in the preseason and you're in those games, teams are not running a lot of their stunts, they're not running a lot of their, packages, they're running stuff that they can evaluate off of. Because they don't give a crap about winning or losing. It's what talent can we actually pull off of this massive roster to build our best roster. And Seattle ran the ball really well. Well, it was great. You're running against base fronts. You're doing this. The Seattle's O-line looked great. Now that they're running against teams that are giving them different front looks, that they're shifting, they're doing things, you're seeing some of these struggle points. And Anthony Bradford's he is not good at targeting as a zone blocker, which is, am I hitting this shoulder? Am I hitting this shoulder? And then I'm driving. And even on one of the runs last night where they ran basically a trap and Bradford trapped, the end came in and Bradford didn't even pancake him. Bradford kind of just stood there and engaged with him. And for a guy his size, be a road grader and run his ass over. And I'm of the camp that Seattle's going to be in the market for a right guard because I just don't see it with Anthony Bradford. Sundell, I think they can get through the season with. He has his ups and downs. I don't know if Sundell's a long-term starter. I like some of the things he does in zone because he's able to get to the second level and his pass pro has been better. But When he plays bigger defensive tackles, he seems to struggle to move them. Especially in zone, if your interior isn't sound, it's very hard to get going. And that's why I think Seattle's having troubles with, and that's why I think you saw them run jet last night with JSN. You saw them do a couple different wrinkles to try and get that outside to widen out, and then they started attacking the inside. And I think that's what Seattle's going to have to do in the second half of the season to get a running game going, is they're going to have to do some unconventional ways to get outside to then open up the inside so they can get back into running inside.
So you made a good point about not like reading the cutback lane correctly. I guess I can't argue that refutes some of what I said. But one thing I will say is like that ability is not expensive. They don't need to go find. First off, don't need to spend another second round pick on a running back ever again, please, for the love of God. But also like that's I'm not saying it's like an every guy has it trait, but it's a replacement level. You can find it in replacement level running backs. As we've seen historically in the most famous zone schemes, they can go get an Arian Foster out of nowhere to become a near Hall of Famer, and those stories just exist over and over and over and over again in Denver, in Houston, and across the league where there were zone schemes running where they've been able to find productive running backs without massive investment. And I just don't want the Seahawks to go make a move for a running back in particular, unless it's, swap a 6th round pick, whatever, that's fine. That's like a marginal difference. And if the difference is a guy that fits the scheme the way you're saying, which I'll acknowledge is legit, I'm fine with that. But what I would like to see, and tell me, so Carlos Ruiz is a center that I think would project to guard in Seattle. I would hope, I guess. I guess I don't necessarily. I think you and I are on the same page. I would rather see Bradford get bumped off that line than Sundell. And then obviously Jackson, JPJ in Oakland has been talked about a lot. What are your feelings? These guys are both like centers by trade. JPJ has been playing some guard in Vegas. Is that right?
Yeah. So JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. I have him as a center. I don't have him as a guard. His natural position is center. He played center for the Raiders last year towards the back half and was one of the better young centers in the NFL. And then Pete Carroll came in there and decided he was the right guard. And it's been a mess ever since they've made that decision. Cesar Ruiz out of the Saints, he is a center guard, but more of a guard. And he to me makes the most logical sense for Seattle if they're looking for a guard upgrade. The reason I say that is he's still young. He's only 26. You'd get him with 2 years left on his deal, I believe. And his best statistical season as a guard came with Clint Kubiak and John Benton last year in New Orleans. He can come in and play right away because he knows the scheme and he knows the system. You got to remember that when you're going to mess with continuity on your O-line for a group that's played together for 8 weeks now at this point, 9 weeks if you include their bye, and been together through the entire offseason, is you can't just go grab any willy-nilly guard you want and plug him in. If it's a guy that doesn't understand the scheme that well, it's going to take him 5 or 6 weeks to get comfortable with this group to the point you were at probably week 2 or week 3 of the season. Cesar Ruiz is a bit different in that regard because he knows the scheme. So you can plug him in at right guard, and he's going to know where the targeting marks are on your zone plays, all those kind of things. He's going to have, terminology might have slightly changed because it always does, but it's familiar enough across the board for him where he can play fast right away. I think if they are to address center, it'll be in the draft. Maybe free agency, but that's where they'll maybe do it, where they may bring in someone to compete with Sundell. You got to remember, Sundell at this point is a rookie in his own right. He played all of, I think, 15 snaps in that Green Bay game last year. And then sparingly, he played some swing tackle at points or, extra tight end sets. He didn't really play center last year. So he's a rookie. Zabel's a rookie. They seem to have some good continuity there. So it might be a piece where you get a better right guard and Sundell's play, it gets better. Mm-hmm. Bradford, to me, if they do bring in a guard, Bradford won't be on this roster because he doesn't possess any versatility. He can't switch and play left guard. He is a right guard and a right guard only. And to me, he's a right guard power scheme gap guy. That's what he is good at. He's good at running power and gap concepts. He's not a zone guy. So I think if you were to move him, maybe they send him back in a trade that way. But if you're going after JPJ, he's coming in as a center. I don't think he's coming in as a guard in Seattle. I will say this. The reason JPJ and Maurice are so interesting is because they're under 30 to me, and you get them with some club control, and now you've got a solid young offensive line. The only one you'd have to really sign coming up is Charles Cross. He's on his 5th-year option, which we kind of have all figured Seattle will sign him most likely and get that deal done. So you're going to have that young group. So that's kind of where I see Seattle in the O-line. But I do think right guard is definitely the bigger sore thumb on that O-line to upgrade. And Bradford played well last night, but he played well by Bradford standards, not by overall standards.
What do you think Ruiz costs?
It depends on what the Saints view their next steps to be. If they view like we want a player because we still want to compete and be relative next year, or we full on tearing this down to the studs and we need draft capital, I think Reese could cost you probably as high as a 3rd-round pick and maybe a pick swap kind of a situation where, hey, we give you our 3rd and a pick swap in, 2026 or 2027 draft kind of a thing. Or it might be, hey, it's a 4th-round pick and a player that you're sending. So maybe it's a 4th-round pick and Bradford going back to fill a guard spot, because from what I hear, the Saints like their 2 young guards, so it depends on that. But I think you're looking anywhere a 3rd or 4th-round pick for Reese and maybe a pick swap.
They have this. We talked about the pass rush and how it's like productive without having an elite guy. Since the beginning of the season, there's been this kind of, and I think when he's played, Jaron Reed's fine at nose tackle. I've had my eye on a nose tackle, like I think a lot of fans have, and I think that there's an opportunity that you could tell me if I'm wrong. There's at least in the standings, there's an apparent opportunity to go big on this. Big literally and figuratively, I guess, in this case, because there's not a lot of these guys out there. There's not a lot of guys who are 330-plus pounds who can move. That's why Jonathan Hankins, who was like, he's 58 years old and just takes up a lot of... I mean, he was like a productive nose tackle here because there's not a lot of these guys. I want the Seahawks, of the guys that I am aware of to be available, I want the Seahawks. The one guy I would give a 1st-round pick for would be Dexter Lawrence. What do you think? I mean, is Dexter Lawrence going to be available? Would you give up a 1st-round pick for Dexter Lawrence? He's, by the way, I should say this, Dexter Lawrence has had a lot of criticism in the New York media recently for the effort he's played with, but would you give up a 1st-round pick for Dexter Lawrence? And do you think the Giants would be receptive to taking a 1st-round pick for Dexter Lawrence?
I think they'd be receptive to taking a 1st-round pick for Dexter Lawrence. I don't know, though, if the Giants view Dexter Lawrence as a tradable asset yet. And the reason I say that is you've already heard the rumors about Thibodeau potentially being on the market and them saying, well, it would take quite a bit. We really like our pass rush. We really like this D-line group. Dexter Lawrence, to me, like right now for the Giants, I think they may view their coaching and their offensive skill positions outside of Jackson Dart and Scatterbo as their main offensive weapons. They need to reinvest on the offensive side. I think they look at it and go, we can do that in the draft, but keep this defense together that is going to grow and get better. You have Brian Burns, you have Abdul Carter. You keep Thibodeau on his 5th year next year. You got Dexter Lawrence. Like, you've got a very good front there that then you can build off of. Trading away Dexter Lawrence now puts a pretty big gap in the middle of that defense because he's not an edge. He's your nose tackle, to your point, or your 3-tech, and he creates a lot of pressure in the interior of that defense on offense.
He's one of the few guys that weighs 330 pounds and has scheme versatility, right?
Yes.
Like most of the time when you see a guy that size, you're like, that's a nose tackle. He's playing 1st and 2nd down only, and that's his lot in life. And that is not Dexter Lawrence.
No, and that's the thing with Dexter Lawrence that, gives him that, ability to be the game wrecker that he is. And that's where I don't see the Giants viewing him. I feel like they'd be quicker to get rid of Thibodeau than they would be Dexter Lawrence. Dexter Lawrence, to me, I think if you were to go after him, it would take quite a bit. And I don't know if you'd see the immediate returns of what you'd have to give up to get him.
So Lawrence is a bit of a luxury, I would say. And I think he would have been less of a luxury yesterday. Right now, I actually don't know. What's the status of Ernest Jones? It's been very vague.
I think so. From what Mike said today, he didn't give an update. Apparently, they're going to give one on Wednesday. He reiterated again it's not season ending. I've got a feeling Jones sprained maybe an MCL or an ACL or something like that, and we might miss him for a couple weeks. Maybe you get him back for the Rams game is the hope, and maybe that's what went into last night's decision where, I believe it was Corbin Smith and some of the other beat reporters there, Greg Bell, said like the training staff took Jones's helmet away, and he was pretty pissed that they did. Like I think, and then you saw him on the sideline, he was jumping up and down. The guy's got a tear. He's not doing those things. I think it was, hey, we're up so much. If this is going to be a 2-week, maybe we can get ahead of it a little now, not put you back in the game. We've got the Cardinals. We can probably get by with Tyrese Knight, Drake Thomas in that game and have you back for that Rams game. Because that Rams game, I know the Seahawks have that circled as this is our next big statement game. We have to win this game if we want to be the team we say we're going to be. So that's where I look at those type of things. And so it'll be interesting to see what eventually comes out as a full diagnosis on Jones, but could mean that Seattle maybe goes calling around the Bengals for Logan Wilson and says, hey, we need more linebacker depth here, because right now they've got Drake Thomas, Tyrese Knight. Tyrese Knight played pretty well last night coming back into the lineup. You've got Surratt, who's more of a special teamer anyways, and then you've got Chris Paul, who you picked up from the Rams, who's been on the practice squad all year. Maybe they think it's time to elevate him. I don't know. But if they go sniffing around the linebackers, maybe they're calling about Logan Wilson.
And then there's so actually, before we talk about pass rushers, because I do want to talk about pass rushers, we talked about JSN being a single point of failure, and there's not necessarily complementary pieces in terms of on-field performance. I think that Torrey Horton is, but not to the degree that, like, playing next to DK Metcalf would have been. I'd like to see the Seahawks potentially add a low-cost, high-risk wide receiver that complements JSN. I want to throw a name at you, and I want to hear if you have thought about this or if you have any other names. Jalen Hyatt wants out of New York. He is an uber athlete. And I'm worried about a guy like Brian Thomas, who's there's been rumors about the Jags being interested in moving on from Brian Thomas, and I like him a ton. But my worry is a guy like Thomas comes to Seattle and expects to get number one receiver targets, and I think that's off the table for me. That's JSN. Brian Thomas is talented enough to get number one receiver targets somewhere. It's just not here, and I don't want to upset that apple cart. Jalen Hyatt's got a similar athletic profile, not quite as athletic as Thomas, I don't think, but very close, and has not performed in his 3 years in the NFL. Is there a guy like that? One, shit on my idea. I'm fine with that if you hate it. But also, are there other guys that you think would be complimentary for different reasons than I'm thinking of?
I think Hyatt's an interesting name. I think his skill set potentially translates and gives you something that, they currently don't have. I think Torrey Horton's game last night may temper some of those calls going out for receiver potentially, and also the use of Arroyo. They split him into the slot a little bit more last night, which was interesting, and I think that's something that they kind of haven't done a lot of. And so now with the Kupp injury, and doesn't sound like Kupp's thing's too long-term, sounds like he could be back sooner rather than later. But the other name for me that kind of has popped up, and there's some people that have talked about Jalen Waddle, but apparently Miami wants a first for that, and Waddle's not going to be playing fiddle number 2 to JSN. He's currently a number 1 as it is, where he is in Miami with Hill's injury. I like Rashid Shaheed out of New Orleans because, again, he knows the system, and he gives you something you don't have. He gives you that over-the-top burner. He gives you someone that's familiar, again, with what they do, kind of what they tried to do with MVS this offseason, who knew it, but MVS is a little bit older. And Shaheed also gives you some special teams versatility. That's the other thing that you got to look for, whoever you're bringing in as a receiver. Like, yes, you want to bring someone in that's got a skill set that complements or adds to what you don't have, but also can help, because Derek Young being on the, injury report now with the quad injury, You've got George Lonnie back there. They had Cody White do some returning last night. Torrey Horton is your punt returner. A Hyatt or a Shaheed actually gives you some opportunities there that maybe you wouldn't normally have. Those are kind of guys I'd be looking for. Again, it depends what the price is. Hyatt you probably get for less than Shaheed because Shaheed's a little bit more proven, but it would be an interesting name to go after for sure.
All right, and now the pass rushers, because I've been surprised to see Boye Mafe on the list of guys the Seahawks would be taking offers for. Especially, is this the last year of his rookie deal?
Yeah.
So anytime you're in that situation, it obviously limits who's going to trade for him, or at least limits his value to that team. So if it was before the season and you're trading Boye Mafe, the pass rusher, for a receiver or an offensive lineman, it's different. Now you're probably trading with a team that's not in playoff contention, which means they're going to want a guy that's available after 2025. So Boye Mafe and Reek Woolen kind of have this weird, I think, narrow trade market that's probably teams that are going to make like a position for position swap that are planning on contending in 2025. You kind of hoped like the Raiders or a team, maybe the Packers, a team that you have like kind of this really obvious open window of communication with based on past trades would be interested in these guys. I don't know where either of those guys go, but I think the obvious spot that the Seahawks have had that's kind of been available to upgrade since the Pete Carroll era. Maybe since, I'm trying to think back of like the last elite performing pass rusher the Seahawks had, maybe Michael Sinclair. It goes back a long ways to like Frank Clark, second round pick, played very well in stretches, didn't play as well in other stretches. And Sinclair is maybe even a guy that I just have some nostalgia for from my childhood. This is like kind of never a thing they've never had, right?
I think for Seattle, the last time they really had an elite pass rusher, someone that was up there, was Patrick Kearney's one year in 2007, I want to say. Maybe it was 2008. That was probably the last year they had like a true...
It's a fun name to bring.
Yeah, right? Patrick Kearney. Everyone kind of forgets about his little run here in Seattle. But like Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett were really good at that point in time, but I don't know if you ever looked at Cliff Averill as like one of the top guys at that point in the NFL at that time. It's definitely been something Seattle's been more of a committee than they've ever been really a standout guy. Like Kearney was kind of last one. Sinclair is probably the other guy you can throw into that camp at that time. Maybe Chad Brown back then too, coming off the edge as an outside linebacker to an extent, was someone that teams had to game plan for, but like they've never really had it.
I don't think Brown really ever put up gaudy sack numbers though. And not that that's the only thing, but yeah, very talented player. I'm not disputing that, but didn't put up the like sexy, and that's not all the pass rush is. But he didn't put up those like sexy, mid double digits sack numbers.
No, and that's the thing that's kind of where they are, and so I think there is an opportunity for Seattle if they view their window as it is opening now. Like we're talking about, your Super Bowl window is actually opening, not it's open or it's trying to stay open. Like it's cracking open. Maybe they do go make a play for a big name. Maybe it is a Trey Hendrickson or someone along those lines that they go take a swing at and try and add that guy to bolster this already, great defensive line that they've got going this year by committee. The reason I think you see Boye Mafe, though, Casey, in those conversations, I don't think Seattle has any intention of re-signing him. I think they have more intention of re-signing Derek Hall. They have Chenna. They have DeMarcus Lawrence still on their cap next year and on their team. I don't think either one of those guys are going anywhere. You got Byron Murphy. Leo's still here. Maybe you go and look for a nose tackle in the draft because who knows if Jaren's going to be able to go, wants to go for another year. So, yeah, I could see, like, if you added a big name to this group, all of a sudden Leo can't be double teamed because you can't leave a Hendrickson or someone like that alone on the edge. You've got Lawrence, you've got Chenna, you got Derek Hall. And if you have to throw Mafe in to go the other way, I don't think too many fans are going to be scoffing at it if the return coming back is an elite level pass rusher.
But yeah, I guess the problem with Mafe to me is he just doesn't make sense going to a team that's in the cellar, right? He makes sense as a guy that's, maybe you move him because he's not going to have reps, and I'm fine with that. But he would be like part of a 3-team trade would be where he would make sense to me, where he's not going to the team that the Seahawks are getting assets from. Do you know does that make sense what I'm saying? Because I just don't think I don't think Cincinnati, if they believe that it's time to sell this season, they're not like, well, we got to see half a season of Boye Mafe and have that be valuable to them in any way. You know what I mean? Like granted, watching that guy for half a season, if you plan on pursuing him in the offseason, might be very valuable, but not valuable enough to give up Trey Hendrickson, obviously.
You wouldn't get us straight up. You'd have to add, obviously, the draft capital to some sort of trade, but Mafe could be a piece. And the reason I say that is you're getting a guy that's still a young pass rusher. You're getting a guy that you've seen enough years of film. Like, he's gotten to 8 sacks. He's gotten to those numbers. You got some track record. It would be different if you were trading a guy that had potential and it was still, hey, we're waiting to see that click. Like, you've seen it click with Mafe. That's where you'd have to give the pick to get more of the buy-in from the other team.
Sure.
I just look at it this way. I think if Seattle moves off of Boye Mafe at this trade deadline, then there's definitely something else coming. There's going to be another piece coming along. There isn't just going to be a, hey, we're getting rid of Boye Mafe and we're going with Lawrence Hall and Chenna. There's another move coming down the line.
Do you think that the Seahawks are going to make the biggest move at the trade deadline? This is kind of rumbling. Adam Schefter was talking about it today that the Seahawks have something big. Do you think is the sexiest move going to be somebody on the defensive line like a Trey Hendrickson that's feels like a big difference maker down the stretch for somebody?
I think what I'll say about that, and I have to be very careful with what I say, Schefter, when Adam Schefter and Jay Glazer and Jordan Schultz all kind of start talking the same thing, all within about 48 hours of each other, your ears should be burning a little bit because Adam Schefter's very connected to the Seahawks and that front office and John Schneider. Jay Glazer is very connected with that group. Jordan Schultz is very connected within that organization, and they've all kind of said the same thing. And a lot of it is, and Adam Schefter said today on the Pat McAfee show, and he had this smirk and this grin to him. And normally when that comes down the pipe, Adam knows something that he can't say yet, but he knows something's going on. And Jay Glazer on Fox was kind of like, without even being prompted, hey, out in the West, Seattle's going to be really aggressive, like at multiple positions kind of the thing. Now, nothing may end up materializing, but if those 3 guys are kind of talking the same thing, you kind of want to pay attention. It's not something to just be like, oh yeah, they're just throwing it out there. Like, no, like, pay attention. And for me, the big thing was when Adam put his post, I think it was Saturday or Friday night, about Boye Mafe being available. Mm-hmm. That, for me, sent off a bunch of red alarms in my head going, Adam Schefter's now throwing Boye's name out there. This is interesting. Then Jay's report came out on Sunday. Then Schultz during the game last night tweeted his thing about, hey, like Seattle's got something up their sleeve potentially. I will say this. I think there is a chance Seattle makes the boldest move this trade deadline. That's all I'm going to say. I do know some things that I've heard through the grapevine, but I'm not going to say those out here. But I will say, don't be surprised if Seattle makes the biggest move.
You're not going to blow your scoop on the Poor Sports Seattle podcast? What the fuck? Right on. Well, that's very exciting. Do you think that the Seahawks first round pick survives the trade deadline?
If they go and they take a big swing, I think there's a chance Seattle moves off of 2 of their first round picks in the next 2 years, potentially.
All right, last question.
And the reason I say that, Okay, go ahead. Yep.
No, you go ahead. You say.
I was just going to say, the reason I say that is you got to think where this team will be picking in the first round. If Seattle finishes out this year as one of the top teams, they're going to be picking in that low half of the first round. And this was similar to what we saw early on with John Schneider. When they have those lower first round picks, because of where they're finishing, you don't get really top end talent in the first round. You're getting more of the top end of the second round. So you have to view that accordingly. If you're going out and getting a big elite level player that is going to give you more than what that guy coming in at pick, 25 to 32, sometimes that's where it is. And if you're a team that views yourself with all this young talent that you're going to sign, like you're going to sign JSN, you're going to sign Witherspoon, you're going to sign Crush, you're going to have this nucleus. You have your quarterback right now. Doesn't mean stop looking, but you've got potentially your franchise quarterback and your number one receiver, and they're all under 30. This is that opportunity we saw like a Rams team a few years ago. Take that big swing. Go get a Von Miller. Go get Matthew Stafford and go, hey, we'll ship out our draft picks and we're going to go win a Super Bowl and still be a contending team for years to come.
Right on. I think that the last question, I'll phrase it a little differently because I don't know if teams factor this in or if this is necessarily that important. And also draft picks become less valuable the further they are from now. But my perception, and I know this will all change as draft season approaches and the draft industry has to hype people up for the draft. So this year's draft class, by the time April rolls around next year, will be considered good. No matter how good it is, it will be considered good in April because they want people to watch the draft. That's my conspiracy theory. I don't think it's even like I don't even think it's that far out there. However, my perception is that the 26 draft is significantly weaker than the 27 draft. So if you were to move out of the 26 draft, I think there's a pretty good chance that you're totally fine with missing out on whoever's available in the mid to late 20s or early 30s, hopefully, in the 26 draft. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and like you said, they're going to hype up every.
You're going to have to make draft content later, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to hype up every draft class as they do.
Yeah.
I think where Seattle views themselves with what they've been able to acquire, what they're building within this organization, they look at it and go, if we can swing for the fences and maybe, we give up a first, but now we're picking a guy in the second or third or fourth round, they might live with that and be like, okay, that's fine. And you got to look at it from John Schneider's track record, really. He went a very long time with struggling with first-round picks. He's hit them, but you look at where a lot of those hits came from. JSN was a top 20. Devin Witherspoon was a top 5. Charles Cross was a top 10 pick, right?
Yeah.
Then you start looking at some of the other guys he's hit on are back in his normal range. Derek Hall being a second-round pick. Abe Lucas being a third-round pick. Reek Wolin being a fifth-round pick. Like, John Schneider and his group are so good in that second to fifth-round area. And then UDFA, I'm okay if you're swinging for the fences and you go get an elite level player. Like we're talking like generational elite level player and give up those first round picks. I'm okay with that. That is fine by me.
All right. So in a moment, I'm going to end the podcast. I'm going to have you hang out for a minute so that your file will continue uploading. I'm going to have you, I'm going to put the only pressure I will back you into the wall is do you think that Trey Hendrickson is an elite generational talent level player? For people with deductive reasoning. Thank you. All right. I'm going to hold on. Let me end this thing. Okay, let me end this, and then we can talk more freely away from these scoopers.